shape. So this is charts for Athaliah versus Jehoshabeath. Jehoshabeath, the attack on the Christ line. And one of the first things that I want to do is to kind of set the record straight from last week. I need to correct something. I thought that Jehoshaphat defeated the Ammonites, the Moabites, and those from Mount Seir after Ahab's death and during the reign of Jehoram I. However, on Resurrection Sunday, I bumped into 2 Chronicles 20:35. And after this, did Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, join himself with Ahaziah, king of Israel, who did wickedly. And the after this, among other things, refers to this battle with Mount Seir, Ammonites, and the Moabites. And so it could not have happened after Ahab's death, but must have happened before Ahab's death. So there I am in the biblical research Walmart in the sky, and you could hear the sirens going, attention, attention, clean up on aisle 3. King's kid tangled up in the noodles again. But anyway, it's all better. It's all better. I found 2 parentheses in which God gives 2 historical narratives out of chronological order. And I was like, oh, so that's what we're looking at here today. And it's interesting and beautiful, and it emphasizes the importance of this Athaliah and Jehoram J marriage and how devastating it really was. This could not have taken place. This war with Mount Seir and Ammon and the Moabites could not have taken place in the 2 years of Ahaziah, his short reign, because in 2 Kings chapter 3, verse 5, it says, but it came to pass when Ahab was dead that the king of Moab rebelled against the king of Israel. This is an entirely different war than the one with the people from Mount Seir. This is the war that involved Elisha that we covered last week. Therefore, Jehoshaphat's victory over Ammon, Moab, and Mount Seir happened before Ahab died. Here's a chart of the error. This is how I taught it last week, and I put it in blocks. You can kind of see the logic, A, B, C, and D, and the major chapters, 17, 18, 19, and 20. And this is where I had it placed. And I was like, oh, well, that seems reasonable, but it just isn't. It doesn't work. So I don't know why it is so many times in the word. I'm working it and I kind of trip over something. I say, ow, and I have to go back and fix it and study it. And here are some of the events from Block A in 2 Chronicles 17, 1 through 11. And let's kind of look at it and get a feel for it. The main idea here is that, well, let's see, I'll show you the corrected version. I think that's the best way to go. Here's the corrected version. And you can see the idea is that Block A tells about Jehoshaphat's growth and blessing. Block B, the attempted alliance with darkness. And then Block C, we're back to Jehoshaphat's growth and blessing, and that includes Block D. So the story is actually retold. This first story reflects the spiritual cause of Jehoshaphat's victories. And then these spell out the second one, after the parentheses, spells out the same story with the specifics or the effects. So we have causes in A and then effects in blocks C and D. But let's look at A just for a moment. 2 Chronicles 17:1, and Jehoshaphat his son reigned in his stead and strengthened himself against Israel. And he placed forces in all the fenced cities of Judah and set garrisons in the land of Judah and in the cities of Ephraim, which Asa his father had taken. So notice this is kind of important because cities of Ephraim appear in Block A, and then they appear also in Block C. Verse 5 of 17. Therefore, the Lord established the kingdom in his hand, and all Judah brought to Jehoshaphat presents, and he had riches and honor in abundance. So this is what I'm calling national dominance. He establishes his kingdom, and everybody loves him so much they bring all the alms to the storehouse. And in the 3rd year of his reign, he sent his princes. And now let's go on down to verse 9. We had these others last week. And they taught in Judah and had the book of the law of the Lord with them, and went throughout all the cities of Judah and taught the word, taught the people the word. So again, the cause is when you share the word of God, you have a foundation upon which God can do great things. And the fear of the Lord fell upon all the kingdoms of the lands that were round about Judah, so that they made no war against Jehoshaphat. And that's this international dominance. And we'll see these two stages appear in the block C and D. And some of the Philistines brought Jehoshaphat presents and tribute silver, verse 11, and the Arabians brought him flocks, 7,700 rams and 7,700 goats. And Jehoshaphat waxed great exceedingly, and he built in Judah castles and cities of store. Then, after peace all around, after fielding a 1,000,000-man army, and after international dominance, including the northern tribes, that's when Jehoshaphat makes the affinity with Ahab. So you can see how these two parts do interconnect in this first section. We have him, he's strengthening himself against Israel, then he makes affinity with Ahab. The main idea is that he has strengthened himself, and that story with Ahab is the part of the main subject. While I was endeavoring to extricate myself from the noodles in aisle 3, I also learned this. The archaic usage of the King James word affinity means to form a treaty by intermarriage. I had no idea. I was using the modern one, which is attraction, a liking, a sympathy for something. No, they became friends. But no, it was that they made a treaty by marriage. They're telling us that affinity, that's when Athaliah got into Judah. That's when she married Jehoram Ch. The adversary just snuck her in there. So the tale of Ahab's final battle simply completes the story of the affinity between Ahab and Jehoshaphat as regarding their lifetimes. Now remember that sinister feeling that Ahab had set Jehoshaphat up because Jehoram Ch, Ahab's son-in-law, would then be king? The parenthesis on the affinity directly connects the marriage of Jehoram Ch and Athaliah, the wicked witch of the north, to this feeling of betrayal. So, however, this marriage between Jehoram Ch and Athaliah gives us an opportunity to set an approximate date for the beginning of the Ahab parenthesis in 18:1, where it says, now Jehoshaphat had riches and honor and abundance and joined affinity with Ahab. When was that? The latest date for the marriage of Jehoram Ch and Athaliah is in Jehoshaphat 7:10, which is Ahab 11:13. Where's that chart on the math? Yeah, here it is. This is the math. This is how we get to this date. Now, hang in there. This next set of calculations is almost as bad as those we do for our taxes. So I go to I'm going to the tax table, which I'm not going to show you. The dates of the chronology given in the years before Christ. Ahaziah's reign began in 849 BC when he was 22. So Ahaziah was born in 871 BC. And since Ahaziah was the fruit of Jehoram Ch and Athaliah, they could not have been married any later than that. They would have only been married earlier, which is the 10th. This is the 10th total year for Jehoshaphat and the 13th total year for Ahab's reign. When we worked the Elijah-Elisha timeline, we counted backwards from Ahab's death through 3 years of peace, 2 years of war with Syria, and 3 years of drought. That brought us to 1214 Ahab, which is 810 Jehoshaphat. Elijah arrived on the scene just when the Baal worshippers were getting everything they could want. Ahab and Jezebel had just married into the royal line and the most influential king of the age. But now you can see that the huge skip in the Ahab parenthesis, the affinity was probably in Ahab 14, but the battle in which he died did not take place until Ahab's 22nd and last year. So there's a skip of 16 years in the chronology. It just skips ahead over a bunch of stuff that we're going to see when we return to the other blocks. I think it's really interesting. Elijah appears within a year of this marriage, where the assault on the Christ line through Baal worship had now started. Elijah and Elisha were God's answer to the immense darkness of this age, as you are God's answer to the immense darkness of this age. So let's go make sure we are looking at the same stuff. Block C. Here we go. Let's look at Block C of the revised and corrected one. Block C returns us to the wonderful and wise doings of Jehoshaphat and his kingdom. This is a retelling of the story of Jehoshaphat's reign with Ahab left out. I don't think we're supposed to understand that the affinity occurred and then the glorious battle. I think we're supposed to understand that the glorious battle brought Jehoshaphat's kingdom to the dominance that we saw at the end of Block A with the million-man army. For instance, listen to Jehoshaphat's prayer in 2 Chronicles 20:10. And now, behold, the children of Ammon and Moab and Mount Seir, whom thou wouldest not let Israel invade. Let's move on down to verse 12 of 2 Chronicles chapter 20. O our God, wilt thou not judge them? For we have no might against this great company that cometh against us, neither know we what to do, but our eyes are upon thee. If he had a million-man army, an organized professional army, I'm not sure that that would be the prayer. Now, spiritually, yeah, because armies don't mean much when it comes to spiritual matters, ultimately. But it doesn't sound like the prayer of a man who's been building an army, a million-man army. It doesn't sound like, and yet God is retelling, sounds like God is retelling the missing details about Jehoshaphat's great abundance in his amazing reign. However, God is not repeating himself in this section. Instead of sending teachers out to Judah, Jehoshaphat brings God's word beyond Judah into Ephraim in the north. Then Jehoshaphat established a godly justice system in this second section in 2 Chronicles 20. Then we get to Block D. In Block D, the psalmist's kid is one of the key prophets. God's deliverance takes place as the army began to sing. You know those Scottish British marching tunes? Sounds like Asaph had received one especially for Jehoshaphat. The words were simple, and I'm sure the tone defiant. The words are given in 2 Chronicles 20:21. Here it goes. Praise the Lord, for his mercy endureth forever. But it must have been a really cool marching song. And as they marched and they built their believing, God turned the armies of Seir, Ammon, and Moab against each other and they wiped each other out. Jehoshaphat didn't have to lift a sword or a sling. Jehoshaphat is so sharp in this section. 2 Chronicles 20:20, he exhorts Judah with one of my favorite sayings. Hear me, O Judah, and ye inhabitants of Jerusalem. Believe in the Lord your God, so shall ye be established. Believe his prophets, so shall ye prosper. Yeah, it repeats the same subject ideas while intensifying them. In Block D, 2 Chronicles 20:28-30, is an echo of the international respect and dominion that we saw earlier in Block A. So let's look. Chapter 20, we're in 28-30. And they came to Jerusalem with psalteries and harps and trumpets unto the house of the Lord. And the fear of God was on all the kingdoms of those countries when they had heard that the Lord fought against the enemies of Israel. I don't really understand why any army would bring all sorts of treasure with them, but these guys did. They had so much treasure with them that the armies of Jerusalem could not carry the treasures back to Jerusalem. I don't know, maybe they had looted some other towns or some other places on their way to Israel. I don't know, but that they had tremendous wealth with them. It was like armies coming out of the east just to give stuff to Jehoshaphat. But now he's got victory, he's got the fear of the nations round about him, and he's got the wealth to develop an army. He's got all those things from 18:1 that the Bible said he had when he made the affinity with Ahab. Okay, that's the first parenthesis, but is the second parenthesis that establishes the pattern and allows us to see what these two parentheses are emphasizing. Yeah, I made this mistake and I found all this stuff, but I'm glad I saw the mistake and then took time to really study it. So here's the second parenthesis, and we have the conclusion and evaluation of Jehoshaphat. Let's take a closer look at 20:32-34, because you can just hear this is like the standard close of a story of a king that we get in Chronicles and in Kings. And Jehoshaphat reigned over Judah. He was 30 and 5 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 20 and 5 years in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Azubah, the daughter of Shilhi. And he walked in the way of Asa his father, and departed not from it, doing that which was right in the sight of the Lord. Albeit the high places were not taken away, for as yet the people had not prepared their hearts unto the God of their fathers. Now the rest of the acts of Jehoshaphat, first and last, behold, are they not written in the book of Jehu, the son of Haranai, who is mentioned in the book of the kings of Israel? That's all standard fare. And we're like, our journey with Jehoshaphat is over. Oh, well, we'll see you at the gathering, maybe. But then we get block F, and it's completely out of order. It's, you know, it's the Ahaziah affair. It's the when Jehoshaphat and Ahaziah get together to try to get gold from Ophir by making boats. They try to imitate Solomon. Wasn't the wisest thing that Jehoshaphat ever did. And the prophet says, no, you're allying yourself with darkness and evil. Bad things are going to happen to your boats, and you're never going to get to go to Ophir. So then the boats crash, and there are tremendous financial consequences. But this is out of chronological order also, because here we are at the end of Jehoshaphat 23:25. And here we are again when he says Jehoshaphat slept with his fathers, 23:25 again. That's the age in which he died. And then suddenly we're skipped back in time, and that's Jehoshaphat 17 or 18. That's when he made the chronological, that's when he made the affinity or the alliance with Ahaziah for the boats. So Ahab's parenthesis jumps forward in time, taking us from like 10 to, I can't remember what it was, 18. But Ahaziah's parenthesis jumps backwards in time, taking us from 23 to the earlier time. So what are these parentheses stressing? They're stressing that there's a snake slithering in the grass that you can't see. There's this Ahab affinity by marriage with Athaliah. And so there we are, married. First time we see it, we're like, married? You married Ahab into the family somehow? What are you thinking? Jehoshaphat just wanted reunification of North and South. It was his passion, well-intended, but utterly blind. But we like smell, it's like we're smelling an electrical fire, but we just aren't sure where it is. We hear some hissing, but we just can't see the snake. The second parenthesis should remind us that the snake rattle we heard is still rattling, because Jehoshaphat is still doing the unification thing, despite God's blessing in battle and his blessing in battle, which was such a different experience than his experience with Ahab. Despite the prophet's warning, and then the consequences, despite the prophet's warning, the consequences hit with the boat thing. So we know that he's still in trouble spiritually on this stuff. Then when 2 Chronicles 25 through 6, we read, Jehoram was 30 and 2 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 8 years in Jerusalem. And he walked in the way of the kings of Israel, as the house of Ahab, for he had the daughter of Ahab to wife, and he wrought that which was evil in the sight of the Lord. Now, like, no, you didn't. You married your eldest son to the daughter of Ahab? How could he? And so we know that based on the buildup of the suspense from the parentheses, that this is not going to be a pretty thing for Judah. The parentheses then serve to emphasize information that foreshadows and highlights the drama of the enemy's attack on the Christ line. As wise as Jehoshaphat was in almost every other aspect of his life, he was blind in his love of his heritage for Israel. It's a little like when Paul went to Jerusalem. Paul just had to save his country. There was no way Jehoshaphat could stop what was coming in the north, and there was no way Paul could have stopped what was coming in Jerusalem. One of the greatest attacks on the Christ line occurred under Athaliah, the daughter of Ahab, because Jehoshaphat sought a secular alliance. The wickedness of Baal worship followed Ahab's daughter into Judah and began an attack which would all but obliterate Judah as a spiritual kingdom. When last we looked, Jehoshaphat's heir to the throne, Jehoram J, killed his other 6 brothers and all his nephews, so that only Jehoram J's children could inherit the kingdom of David. This was but stage one of the enemy's attack on the Christ line. 2 Kings 8:18 enumerated the wickedness of Athaliah's husband Jehoram. And he, Jehoram J, walked in the way of the kings of Israel and did as the house of Ahab, for the daughter of Ahab was his wife. He did evil in the sight of the Lord. If Jehoram J murdered his brethren in his accession year, then this was the fifth yearly interval of Jehoram of Israel. The last recorded prophecy from Elijah concerning the death of Ahaziah was 5 years earlier. Nevertheless, an unnamed prophet foretold the coming of Josiah by name. So also did Elijah. This message written came to Jehoram J shortly after he had murdered his brethren, as much as 5 years after the death of Elijah. Can you imagine the impact this had on the entire court of Judah when the words of the great prophet of the northern kingdom, Elijah, reached out across time and foretold of Jehoram J's doom? And the doom quickly came to pass. It involved this is one of the promises. Behold, with a great plague will the Lord smite thy people and thy children and thy wives and all thy goods. And thou shalt have great sickness. And he gets really sick and he dies. He's totally miserable. It's about as bad as Herod in the New Testament. And the word of the Lord came quickly to pass, so that his sons and his wives were wiped out. And the way it happened is also biblically like a bolt from the blue. To take Jerusalem, one would need a great siege, such as Sennacherib tried to employ against Hezekiah, and which Nebuchadnezzar more than once employed against Jehoiakim and Zedekiah. To take Samaria, both Ben-Hadad and Shalmaneser V employed long sieges. The idea that this army of the Philistines and Arabians managed to simply walk into Jerusalem seems impossible, according to the wisdoms of the senses world. 50 years later, Jehoash I would accomplish a swift victory over the walls of Jerusalem, but he had already defeated Judah's army, so there was no one to defend those walls. After the death of all his heirs, from all his wives, only one remained, Jehoahaz, who's also called Ahaziah. All that remained of David's line then was Ahaziah, the son of Jehoram J and Athaliah, the progeny of Ahaziah's other wives. The last remaining heir of David was the son of a Baal-worshipping king of Judah and the Baal-worshipping daughter of the Baal-worshipping Ahab. Well, that's almost the situation. And 2 Chronicles 22:8 shows that some of Ahaziah's nephews, the sons of the brothers killed by the Philistines and Arabians, they had survived, but they don't survive long. And it came to pass that when Jehu was executing judgment upon the house of Ahab, he found the princes of Judah and the sons of the brethren of Ahaziah that ministered to Ahaziah, and he slew them. He did not have revelation from God to kill those princes. But 2 Chronicles 22:9 shows that Ahaziah was still alive when Jehu murdered these princes. He lived a little bit longer than they did. And he, Jehu, sought Ahaziah, and they caught him, for he was hid in Samaria, and brought him to Jehu. And when they had slain him, they buried him, because, said they, he is the son of Jehoshabeath, who sought the Lord with all his heart. So the house of Ahaziah had no power to keep the kingdom. I'll set this screen up here and you can look at it. We won't have time to go over it, but if you get stuck on anything, just text me on Facebook. So now all Jehoshaphat's other heirs had been killed by Jehoram J. Then all of Ahaziah's brethren had been killed by the Ethiopians and the Philistines. And now Jehu goes off the reservation and kills every other possible heir of David, including Ahaziah. So now he did have God's go-ahead to kill Ahaziah. That was part of God's plan, but not killing those nephews. So was that it? Was it game over? Nope, but it's the end game. As Jehoram J's youngest son, Ahaziah, would have had fewer years in which to produce progeny to rejuvenate the royal line of David. According to 2 Kings 8:26, Ahaziah was only 22. So Jehoram J was 18, for instance, when he conceived his youngest son, Ahaziah. So they were conceiving sons, and they were pretty young. So 22, 18, it's very possible. So all was not lost. Ahaziah at 22 must have had a number of wives and could have been producing sons for some time. In fact, as we'll find out, he did have some because someone's going to kill him. Still, the enemy's attempt to defeat the promises of God concerning his Messiah was indeed very close to achieving its ends. In 2 Kings 9:21 through 27 records that Jehu killed both Jehoram I and Ahaziah. Jehoram I ruled 12 years, but Jehoram J ruled only 8. Hence, Jehoram I outlived a king of Judah, which was really rare. Jehoram J died in 849 BC, while Jehoram I lived past the Nisan of 848 BC. Jehu had just been at the siege of Ramoth Gilead, fighting against Hazael and the Syrians. This is where Jehoram I had received wounds. There, according to 2 Kings 9:1 through 3, one of the sons of the prophets, under orders from Elisha, anointed Jehu king. 2 Kings 9:1 through 3, it says, and Elisha the prophet called one of the children of the prophets and said to him, gird up thy loins and take a box of oil in thine hand and go to Ramoth Gilead. And when thou comest thither, look out there, Jehu, the son of Jehoshabeath, the son of Nimshi, and go in and make him arise up from among his brethren and carry him to an inner chamber. And take a box of oil and pour it on his head and say, thus saith the Lord, I have anointed thee king over Israel. Then open the door and flee and tarry not. When Jehoram I and Ahaziah see Jehu, one of Jehoram I's top commanders, riding furiously towards them at Jezreel, in 2 Kings 9:21, they go out to see what the emergency is. And Jehoram said, make ready. And his chariot was made ready. And Jehoram, king of Israel, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, went out, each in his chariot. And they went out against Jehu, and they met him in the portion of Naboth, the Jezreelite. It is ironic that they met together in this portion of Naboth, the Jezreelite, for Ahab and Jezebel had killed Naboth to take his portion. And it was as Ahab went to take possession of Naboth's vineyard that Elijah foretold the doom of Jezebel. Ahab and all of his house, of Jezebel and of Ahab and of all of his house. In 2 Kings 9:22 through 23, Jehoram I realizes that he's been betrayed and turns to flee. Then in 9:24, Jehu kills him as he tries to escape. It says, and Jehu drew a bow with his full strength and smote Jehoram between his arms, and the arrow went out at his heart, and he sunk down in the chariot. Perhaps the meeting at Naboth's inheritance was not entirely coincidental, for in 2 Kings 9:26, Jehu was adamant that the prophecy of Elijah be fulfilled. And 2 Kings 9:26a is part of the prophecy. Surely I have seen yesterday the blood of Naboth and the blood of his sons, saith the Lord, and I will requite thee in this plat, saith the Lord. In 2 Kings 9:26b is the fulfillment when Jehu commands, now therefore take and cast him into the plat of ground according to the word of the Lord. Likewise, 2 Kings 9:27 says it was by orders of Jehu that Ahaziah was killed. But when Ahaziah, the king of Judah, saw this, he fled by way of the garden house. According to 2 Kings 21:2, this garden house was a house of Ahab that was close to Naboth's vineyard. After Ahab murdered Naboth, he stole his inheritance. He went ahead with his plan to convert the vineyard into a garden of herbs. Surely the garden was tremendously fragrant in the senses realm, but it stunk to high heaven spiritually. Verse 9:27 continues, and Jehu followed after him and said, smite him also in the chariot. And they did so at the going up of Gur, which is by Iblim. And he fled into Megiddo and died there. If Ahaziah was almost all that remained of the Christ line, why would God have Jehu kill him? Wouldn't this actually make Jehu part of the attack on the Christ line? Jehu, according to 2 Corinthians 22:7, was not part of the problem. And the destruction of Ahaziah was of God by coming to visit Jehoram. For when he was come, he went out with Jehoram against, or in front of, Jehu, the son of Nimshi, whom the Lord had anointed to cut off the house of Ahab. So this death was of God, according to 2 Chronicles 22:7. On the level of the senses, the fewer heirs of David, the greater the danger was to the Christ line. However, Second Chronicles 22:9 eloquently explains the greater spiritual danger. Because of Jehu's actions, according to Second Chronicles 22:9, after the death of Ahaziah himself, the house of Ahaziah was destroyed and had no power to keep still the kingdom. Here's the reading. And he sought Ahaziah, and they caught him, for he was hid in Samaria, and brought him to Jehu. And when they had slain him, they buried him, because they said, he is the son or descendant of Jehoshabeath, who sought the Lord with all his heart. So the house, the administration of Ahaziah, had no power to keep still the kingdom. This is of critical importance because if Ahaziah continued as king, or if his administration with Athaliah as the queen mother continued, the worship of Baal would not have ended in Judah. The resulting damage would have been inestimable. Below follows the blow-by-blow account of Ahaziah's death given by two apparently contradictory sections from 2 Kings 9:27 to 28 and 2 Chronicles 22:9. At first, Jehu fled with some success. But Ahaziah fled Jehu at some success. But Jehu and his men were soon in hot pursuit. 2 Chronicles 22:9a. And he, by synecdoche, he means Jehu and his forces, as we'll see, fought Ahaziah. And then 9:27a, 2 Kings 9:27a. But when Ahaziah, the king of Judah, saw this, he fled by the way of the garden house, and Jehu and his forces followed him. Then while in pursuit, Jehu's men wound Ahaziah. 2 Kings 27b, and Jehu said, smite him in the chariot. And they did so at the going up to Gur, which is by Iblim. This seems to mean that Ahaziah was heading south, but was cut off at Iblim, and then fled north to Megiddo, which is about 25 miles away. Nevertheless, even wounded, Ahaziah makes his escape. Perhaps his chariot was tremendously fast. 2 Kings 9:27c, and he fled to Megiddo. However, Ahaziah was captured while hiding in Megiddo, which is in the north, the region, not the city of Samaria. 2 Chronicles 22:9b, and they caught him, for he was hid in Samaria at Megiddo in the region of Samaria. Jehu's men then brought Ahaziah to Jehu, who was also at Megiddo, because he had been part of the pursuit the entire time. 2 Chronicles 22:9c, and brought him to Jehu, and Ahaziah was put to death in Megiddo. 2 Kings 27c, and he died there. 2 Chronicles 22:9d, and they, Jehu's servants, had slain him. Ahaziah's burial was with full honors, not for his sake, but for Jehoshaphat's sake. God's solution to the spiritual corruption in Judah had started. Athaliah now had no legal rights to rule in Judah because the house of Ahaziah had been destroyed. Here again is 2 Chronicles 22:9e, according to Young's literal translation. And there is none to the house of Ahaziah to retain power for the kingdom. At this point, all of the sons of Jehoram J had been killed, including Ahaziah. However, the sons of Ahaziah by other wives yet lived. One of those sons would be crowned king, and his mother would replace Athaliah as queen mother. But Athaliah wasn't having it. She'd wipe out the entire royal line and grab power by raw military force. The wickedness of the enemy can be unimaginable, and here the enemy's counterpunch was almost devastating. After the death of Ahaziah in 2 Kings 11:1, the enemy tried to strike at all that was left of the imperiled royal line of David. Here it says in 11:1, and when Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she arose and destroyed all the seed royal. The power of this attack is emphasized by God's use of overstatement for emphasis. Literally, Athaliah destroyed all but one of the royal seed. By God's power alone, just one of the royal line was saved, an infant less than a year old. This is recorded in 2 Kings 11:2. But Jehoshabeath, the daughter of King Joram, sister of Ahaziah, took Joash, the son of Ahaziah, and smote him from among the king's sons which were slain. Stole him from among the king's sons who were slain. So Josiah, the son of Ahaziah, survives because Jehoshabeath, Jehosheba saved him, stole him. The courage and strength Jehosheba displayed in the face of abject wickedness is almost unfathomable, but with God, all things are possible. Jehosheba saved the Christ line. Jehosheba was a princess, but the believer who was Joash's nurse and Joash were hidden in a bedroom. Can you imagine the sounds they heard as waiting in the palace bedroom, fearing for their lives? What else must Jehosheba have done to allow Joash and the nurse to escape the palace? The Bible doesn't say, but she must have had to risk her life even to get messages to the priests in the temple. How would she know who to trust? How much fury and fear must she have had to keep bottled up so as not to give away the escape? Then in verse 3, and he was with her hid in the house of the Lord 6 years, and Athaliah did reign over the land. How do you keep a secret like that for 6 years? I'll bet Jehoash learned some Bible, though. Verse 4, and the 7th year after the seventh Nisan is what counting like a Hebrew means, Jehoiada sent and fetched the rulers over hundreds with captains and the guard, and brought them to him into the house of the Lord, and made a covenant with them, and took an oath of them in the house of the Lord, and showed them the king's son. Wow. What must that have been like, to believe the line of David and the majesty of Judah, and all Israel was gone for 6 years. And then all of a sudden, during a secret meeting, there he is. Must have been kind of like a resurrection experience. He lives? Just shocked. He lives? God's plan still lives? Must have been something. And he commanded them, saying, this is the king that ye shall do. This is the thing that ye shall do. A third part of you that enter in on the Sabbath shall even be keepers of the watch of the king's house. And a third part shall be at the gate of Shur, and a third part at the gate behind the guard. So shall ye keep the watch of the house, that it be not broken down. 2 of you all that go forth on the Sabbath, even they shall, 2 parts of you that go forth on the Sabbath, even they shall keep watch of the house of the Lord about the king. And ye shall compass, surround the king round about, every man with his weapons in his hand, and he that cometh within the ranges, the precinct of the temple, let him be slain, and be ye with the king as he goeth out and as he cometh in. And the captains over the hundreds did according to all the things that Jehoiada the priest commanded, and they took them every man his men that were come to him in on the Sabbath, and them that should go out on the Sabbath, and came to Jehoiada the priest. That has something to do with the priestly courses changing on the Sabbath. You'd have twice as many priests in at that moment, and the one batch wouldn't go home, they just join the army. And the captains over hundreds did the priest give David's spears and shields, and that were in the temple of the Lord. And the guard stood every man with his weapons in his hand round about the king, from the right corner of the temple to the left corner of the temple, along the altar and the temple. And he brought forth the king's son, and put the crown upon him, and gave him the testimony. And they made him king, and anointed him. And they clapped their hands, and said, God save the king. And when Athaliah heard the noise of the guard and of the people, she came to the people in the temple of the Lord. Athaliah had been completely kept in the dark. She had no clue. That took big believing. 6 years, not a clue, not a whisper. And when she looked, behold, the king stood by the pillar, as the manner was, and the princes and the trumpeters by the king, and all the people of the land rejoiced and blew with trumpets. And Athaliah rent her clothes and cried, treason, treason. The people are rejoicing, and she's crying treason. Put a fork in her, she's done. By the way, you bet they were rejoicing. Sure, they hated old Athaliah, the tyrant Baal worshiper, but even more, the hope of Israel was to them born anew. But Jehoiada the priest commanded the captains of the hundreds, the officers of the host, and said unto them, have her forth without the ranges, precincts of the temple, and him that followeth her kill with the sword. For the priest had said, let her not be slain in the house of the Lord. There's some discussion about the Hebrew word translated ranges. I favor the precinct of the temple right now because of that immediate context where it says Uh, have her forth without the ranges, for the priest said, let her not be slain in the house of the Lord. So that seems like that connects. The precincts of the temple seems to fit there. That's as much as I've got on it. So in verse 16, and they laid hands upon her, and she went by the way by the which the horses came into the king's house, and there was she slain. And Jehoiada made a covenant between the Lord and the king and the people, and that they should be the Lord's people, between the king also and the people. And all the people of the land went into the house of Baal and break it down. His altars and his images break they in pieces thoroughly, and slew Mattan, the priest of Baal, before the altars, and the priest anointed officers over the house of the Lord. There was a house of Baal in Judah? How did that happen? It's a partial explanation of how Athaliah managed to get enough control of the government that under Jehoshaphat had been so godly. She and Jehoram J must have sold the worship of Baal to many. If the marriage was in Jehoshaphat 7:10, they had until 22:25, that's 15 years, to run little bow to Baal classes. In that time, they could easily have packed the government with Baal worshippers. Then when Jehoram J killed all the brothers and nephews, he replaced them with Baal worshippers. Nasty, huh? Then he took he could have, we don't know, but it seems logical. And he took the rulers over hundreds and captains and the guard and all the people of the land, and they brought down the king from the house of the Lord, and he came by the way of the gate of the guard to the king's house, and he sat on the throne of the kings. And all the people of the land rejoiced, and the city was in quiet, and they slew Athaliah with the sword beside the king's house. 7 years old was Jehoash when he began to reign. After all that planning, all that hate, all that scheming, Athaliah was brought down by a single faithful princess, Jehoshabeath, and the hope of Judah appeared reborn, and Judah could breathe again. 2 Kings 12, 1-2. In the 7th year of Jehu, Jehoash began to reign, and 40 years reigned he in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Zibiah of Beersheba. And Jehoash did that which was right in the sight of the Lord all his days. I want to stop right there, right? Well, it's for a long time, but it's all his days wherein Jehoiada the priest instructed him. But still, he was good king, good governance, godly governance. Israel's restored, Israel's redeemed. Within a generation of the great king Jehoshaphat, how could such evil have found a footing in Judah? In the first place, while twice in the first generations of the divided kingdom, God had a plan for unity, a plan dismissed by Jeroboam and Baasha. Under Jehoshaphat's glory, Jehoshaphat framed a plan for unity of the two kingdoms, one that ignored spiritual realities greater than the will of men. The second reason the line of David was so open to attack was that the spiritual realities Jehoshaphat ignored were far more wicked than he understood. After Omri, the sin of Jeroboam, idolatry, became something far more corrupt, for the worship of Baal was based on hatred for the one true God. This period of time is a challenge to record chronologically, because almost every element expressed in the chronologies of the kings of Israel come into play in this sequence. Civil wars, accession, non-accession, year dating. The only unrecognized reign in the period of the divided kingdom comes into play in this one. Athaliah is not reckoned as a queen, but as a plague. So she's counted from Nisan to Nisan. It's actually the time that Jehoash is hidden that is counted, because that's a kingdom held in abeyance. Because of the spill on aisle 3, there's not time to go over that. But if you get stuck, just let me know. Facebook me, whatever you want. The sin of Jeroboam was to ignore the law of Moses and to trick others into thinking that worshiping false idols was acceptable to God and would bring the same blessings as the law of Moses. The worship of Baal was something else. This biblical distinction is especially plain in 2 Kings 10, 28-30. Thus Jehu destroyed Baal out of Israel, the northern kingdom. Howbeit, from the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin, Jehu departed not. from after them, to wit, the golden calves that were in Bethel and that were in Dan. And the Lord said unto Jehu, because thou hast done well in executing that which is right in mine eyes, and hast done unto the house of Ahab according to all that was in mine heart, thy children of the fourth generation shall sit on the throne. These, including Jehu, these 4 generations in Israel, are the rule of the twilight kings, a subject for another session. Anyway, bless you guys. You are the best. That's all I've got tonight.